Welcome to English Universe. In this lesson, you will improve your English by listening to a story. Listen carefully and repeat after me to practice pronunciation. Let's begin. My name is Emily, and I want to tell you about the day a simple taxi ride changed my life. It was the day I discovered the power of learning through real-life experiences. Before that moment, I had always been afraid of speaking English. I could read and write a little, but I would freeze whenever I had to speak. I was terrified of making mistakes, of embarrassing myself, of people laughing at me. But one unexpected ride with a kind taxi driver changed everything. I had just moved to New York City for college. Everything felt big, fast, and overwhelming. The people, the streets, the towering buildings, all of it made me feel small. Back in my hometown, I rarely had to speak English, but now I had no choice. From ordering food to asking for directions, I needed English for everything. The problem was, I avoided speaking as much as possible. I would point at menus, nod in response, and keep my sentences as short as I could. I felt like an outsider in a city where everyone seemed so confident and fluent. One afternoon, I had an important meeting with my academic advisor. I had planned to take the subway, but when I arrived at the station, I realized I had forgotten my Metro card. I started to panic. I didn't have time to go back to my dorm and get it. If I missed this meeting, I would have to wait weeks for another appointment. I needed another way to get there, and fast. That's when I saw a yellow taxi parked at the curb. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to the car and opened the door. "Hello," I said softly, sliding into the back seat. The driver, a middle-aged man with warm eyes, turned to look at me. "Where to?" he asked. I hesitated, trying to find the right words. I knew the address, but my mind went blank. My hands gripped my phone as I struggled to speak. Finally, I held up the address on my screen. The driver smiled. "Okay. No problem," he said and started driving. I let out a sigh of relief. Maybe I could get through this ride without saying much. I stared out of the window, watching the busy streets of New York. My heart was still beating fast from the stress of trying to speak. After a few minutes, the driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "First time in the city?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Welcome to New York," he said cheerfully. "Big city, huh?" I smiled nervously. "Yes, very big." He chuckled. "Don't worry, you'll get used to it. Where are you from?" I hesitated again, afraid I would say something wrong. "Brazil," I finally said. "Brazil. Beautiful country. I had a passenger from Brazil last week. She was learning English too." I felt my face grow warm. Could he tell I was struggling? I looked down, embarrassed. "You speak English?" he asked kindly. "A little," I admitted. "You understand me?" I nodded. "That's good. That means you already know some English. The more you speak, the better you get." I smiled weakly. "I make mistakes." He nodded. "Of course. Everyone does. I make mistakes in English too, and I've lived here my whole life." I looked at him in surprise. "Really?" "Sure. English is tricky, but mistakes help us learn. If you don't try, you won't improve." His words stayed with me. I had always been so afraid of making mistakes that I avoided speaking altogether. But what if mistakes weren't bad? What if they were part of the process? He continued, "Tell me something. What do you like about New York?" I hesitated, then said, "I like the lights." He nodded. "Ah, the city lights. Beautiful at night." I felt encouraged. "And the buildings? Very tall." "Exactly. So many tall buildings here." I relaxed a little. I was speaking and he understood me. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't correcting me. He was just listening. He kept asking simple questions. "What food do you like? Do you miss home? Do you like music?" I answered in short sentences, sometimes pausing to think of the right words. But he waited patiently every time. I wasn't perfect, but I was communicating. By the time we reached my destination, something had changed in me. I had spoken more English in that short ride than I had in weeks. I had made mistakes, but it didn't matter. I had been understood. And most importantly, I had realized that I didn't need to be perfect to speak English. I just needed to try. I paid for the ride and got out of the taxi, but before closing the door, I turned back to the driver. "Thank you," I said. "You helped me." He grinned. "Anytime. Keep practicing. You're doing great." As I walked toward my meeting, I felt lighter. I wasn't just a nervous girl in a big city anymore. I was someone who could speak, someone who could learn, someone who could grow. And all it took was one taxi ride to show me that. From that day on, I stopped avoiding English. I spoke to my classmates, ordered food without pointing, and asked for directions with confidence. I knew I would still make mistakes, but I also knew that mistakes were just a part of learning. The important thing was to keep trying. If you are afraid to speak English, remember my story. Don't wait until you are perfect. Start now. Speak, make mistakes, and learn from them. You will improve little by little every day. Thank you for listening to English Universe. Keep practicing and see you next time.